Between the last heartbeat and the first silence, something extraordinary seems to happen. For millennia, in every culture, different people have described the same journey. A light, an immense peace, the inexplicable certainty of continuing to exist.
In 1970, 44 years ago, when I was a young man, I had a near-death experience. I was killed in a motorcycle wreck, and I went out of body. The being of light is definitely a being. It's the brightest, prettiest, most loving light I've ever seen. I've never been so in love or at home or with my family or with, it's where I'm from. And I felt that this being and I had known each other for, I use the term thousands of years or eons. We'd always known each other. There was no beginning, no end to how long we've known each other.
Today we call it a near-death experience, a phenomenon that science studies, that history remembers, and that transforms lives in seconds.
When I was about 5 years old, they took me into the operating room and they put the mask over my face. The next thing I knew, I just shot up out of my body. And then I saw somebody come up to me in a black dress, and it was my great-grandmother, whom I'd actually known until I was about, well, she died when I was, I think, 2.5 or something like that.
Hallucination, or consciousness beyond the body. In hospitals and universities around the world, research teams have followed the leads, from the Netherlands to the United States and the United Kingdom.
In standard practice in neurosurgery, the belief is that the brain creates the consciousness. The truth is that the consciousness makes the brain, and not the other way around. The brain is just like a television set. It's a receiving station. The consciousness exists outside the body.
At the University of Virginia, psychiatrist Bruce Grayson has documented thousands of cases and their life changes. Less fear of death, more empathy, a new sense of purpose.
Rising above my body into a vibrant green light, it was as if I was hovering above my body. My consciousness was floating above my body. The thinking part of me was up here. This down here just felt like a shell, but it was my shell.
This film explores those frontiers, real testimonies, clinical evidence, ancient wisdom, and questions that science still can't answer.
I don't remember going in specifically to my body, except that, it was like going down a very small, like a funnel or something. I tried to lift my arm, and it felt so heavy after having been really light, and it was so nice being not in a body because everything was light and I could just go where I wanted to, without even thinking.
From Egypt to India, from Tibet to the indigenous peoples, humanity has spoken of journeys of the soul, of guides, of a threshold. Perhaps death is not the opposite of life, but rather a part of it. Different ages, different countries, the same account. Separation from the body, life review, tunnel, beings of light, a love beyond words.
I totaled my automobile, and My spirit and soul immediately left my body in the car and went through the tunnel we hear people talk about quickly, all the way through to the other end and out the other end into pure white light. I also was spoken to with a voice, what some people call a conversation with God. I was told immediately when I entered the pure light by a male voice, and we all hear whatever voice we need to hear in whatever language in which we need to hear it, telling me, "Lewis, you were called here to have this conversation and to be sent back because you are not doing your work."
Many cases include a dialogue with a greater intelligence, a source.
But I did have an encounter in that encounter with a fellow who came to me and introduced himself as Ben. He said that he had come to be with me in this moment so that I would not have to have the experience alone, and told me that the only thing that I needed to know moving forward from this experience is that I did not have anything to worry about, because I was hurt. I was hurt, and I was trapped in the car for 45 minutes. But he had the most beautiful eyes I've ever seen and was very gentle. He called me by name from the first meeting. He spoke very softly and very gently. As soon as he touched me, I completely went limp. But then as he stepped back from the car, he said, "I have to go now," and smiled and vanished in thin air. And I knew I had literally been touched by an angel.
Anthropologists see patterns. Guides or ancestors accompany the crossing. In the West, we say angel. Elsewhere, protector, spirit, or simply love.
Put out my hand, she took my hand, and she said, "Well, you're just here for a little visit." I remember being in like a corridor of like a building that we had gone into, and there was a long corridor with doors off of it, like a school. It had like classrooms, different rooms. Well, they opened the door to the classroom and they said, "You can look at this, this is a classroom, people are learning things." And they were at a keyboard. They were actually, and you have to realize this is like 1951, because I was born in 1945. There were no such things as computers, especially personal computers. They were big, huge, room-sized things then in those days. And nobody had ever heard of such a thing. There were typewriters, of course, but these were not keyboards like that. They had little squares, and they also lit up. I could see the light underneath them, like some were blue and some were red and some were green. And I remember that the man told me, he said, "You will see these later in your life."
Premonitions, sudden knowing, encounters with family who have died. Global archives hold thousands of accounts collected from around the world.
It's the brightest, prettiest, most loving light I've ever seen. I've never been so in love or at home or with my family or with, it's where I'm from. And I felt that this being and I had known each other for, I use the term thousands of years or eons. We'd always known each other. There was no beginning, no end to how long we've known each other. If you think of each of our consciousnesses as one little grain of sand and infinite intelligence as the whole beach of sand, I was plugged back in, my little grain of sand was back on the beach, where I belonged, where I came from.
In the Egyptian Book of the Dead, the soul crosses halls of judgment and is reborn. In Tibetan Buddhism, the Bardo describes intermediate states. Hinduism speaks of eternal consciousness. Myths, or metaphors, for a shared human experience?
Just when I say I've been in the light and experienced all knowledge, where there's nothing but love and light and truth and peace and grace, are still not enough when you add all the words together to fully describe what I experienced.
And yet, almost all come back. It's not your time. They return transformed. How does science study what it cannot ethically induce? One path: follow those who returned from cardiac arrest. In the AWARE projects, Hospitals documented recall during resuscitation. Some patients described in detail what occurred while no conscious brain activity was detectable.
It's been very difficult to do scientific research on these kinds of experiences because it's not ethical to try to induce a near-death experience. And they tend to happen spontaneously, so it's very difficult to know when one of it's going to happen. On the other hand, there are instances in which people claim to separate from their body and they can correctly describe things from other positions, other places. That's when I become more interested, because those are things that can be tested. And you don't need to have somebody in a near-death condition in order to test it. So what we have focused on, what my research focuses on mostly, is people who are not near death, but just completely ordinary states, who are asked, for example, to describe something at a distance or that is hidden. And we have pretty good evidence that people can do that. Can we demonstrate that consciousness is non-local? And by that meaning that you can gain information from a distance in space or time. The answer is yes, because we've been doing experiments to test whether that is possible. And I believe that if you dispassionately look at the evidence that is available, then you will find that the answer is yes. Or at least we have high confidence that the answer is yes, that people can gain information from a distance in space or time. Maybe consciousness requires the thing that we call the brain in order to be aware, and maybe not. Maybe any sufficiently complex system would do, but we don't know yet.
For Bruce Grayson, regardless of origin, NDEs leave measurable after effects: lower fear of death, increased compassion, reoriented values.
One fellow I knew was a sergeant in the Marines in Vietnam and was shot in the chest. And during that operation, he had an elaborate near-death experience. When he came back from that, the idea of shooting someone else was totally unthinkable to him. He felt that he was no different from the people he was shooting at. And he had to eventually leave the Marines, which had been his lifelong goal to be a Marine, ended up coming back to the States and retraining as a medical technician. And I've heard this again and again and again from police officers and military officers who retrained in social work, medical care, clergy, teaching, and so forth. Being a psychiatrist, I've worked with people for about 50 years now. I know how difficult it is to help them make changes in their lives. And here you have an experience that takes place in a matter of seconds or a fraction of a second that totally transforms their attitudes, values, and beliefs and behavior.
In Spain, Surgeon Manuel Sansegarra compiles dozens of cases and posits a superconsciousness transcending the body. His work has stirred public debate. And physics? From multi-dimensional models to mathematics with 11 dimensions, certain frameworks allow realities beyond our 3D plus time.
And physics says we have 7 levels in string theory and 1 more level in M theory for a total of 11 dimensions. Those 8 extra dimensions which we have not discerned are the dark energy, the 96% of the universe that we cannot yet even detect. But we know mathematically that it's there from our astronomy. We know that the dark energy and the dark matter exist and make up 96% of the universe, which we don't yet see. There's a lot of room for a lot of afterlife and a lot of different levels out there. But the materialist scientists who only want 3D, they won't look at it. They won't even, they say, no, it's a bunch of baloney. They don't even look. They just say, no good, impossible, I'm not even gonna look at it. Well, how do they know it's impossible? They see 4% of the universe and the rest of it's impossible. But that's ridiculous. We have to remember that it's not in our 4%. We can't know it all yet. But we're now at a point where we are making beachheads on a new territory, those other dimensions.
I think when you're a scientist working on the edge of the known, if you really require certainty to feel comfortable, you're in the wrong business. Because most of the time you begin to recognize when you're studying over the edge of what is known, nobody knows what's going on. For me, that's exciting. And so I don't mind that we don't understand it. The challenge is, how do we become clever enough to be able to study that unknown space and begin to understand it.
Perhaps the better question isn't if there's something after, but what NDEs reveal about consciousness and about how to live. To converse with the divine, to hear a purpose. Those who return often return with a mission.
I had a woman come to me at a psychic fair, and when she approached my table, she looked as if she had been emotionally beaten. She looked very distraught. She looked very tired, very worn down. When she sat down in front of me, I instantly felt the presence of her mother and father come in on my right. I felt the presence of her daughter and her husband come in on my left. So I told her, "Ma'am, I feel your mother and father on my right in spirit, and I feel your daughter and your husband file in spirit on my left." And she says to me, "My husband just died 2 weeks ago." Well, as soon as she said that, I hear him say to me very emphatically, tell her, I heard her the last 4 days of my life." So I said, "Ma'am, your husband wants you to know very emphatically that he heard you the last 4 days of his life." And my client just burst into tears, and she said, "My husband was in a coma the last 4 days of his life, and boy did I do a lot of talking. I forgave for everything that needed forgiven. I asked forgiveness for everything that needed to be forgiven. And I told my husband that I loved him. Until this moment, I didn't know he hurt me." And I literally watched 50 pounds of weight come off my client's shoulders. She lit up. She released all of that struggle. All of that guilt and worry was just gone instantly.
In clinical literature, many NDEs occur under deep anesthesia or cardiac arrest, when no conscious experience should be expected. Whatever the explanation, the light seems to bring the same message. We are not alone. In many traditions, death is a passage. For others, it's an awakening.
My own mother's passing in April of 2012. I stood right beside my mother when my mother passed away. And within an hour of my mother's passing, my mother spoke to me. She told me, "I've made it. I've crossed over. I'm there." So I heard it as clear as day.
We all leave in many different ways, but it's very similar. You know, the sleeping, I've heard that and I feel that, you know, people feel like they go into a deep sleep, or there's something that kind of pulls them out of their body right before the incident happens. It was a young girl that was in a car accident. I'm trying to remember the reading. And she said to the mother that right in the moment of impact, she actually didn't feel anything. And it's not that she blacked out, but on the moment of impact, it was like something pulled her out of her body. So her consciousness and awareness of being in the body and actually experiencing pain or things being pushed into her body or being in the vehicle on impact, none of that stuff was there. She had peace and she didn't experience the pain. Although on the physical side, us as humans, we see a car crash and we see a body and we see a girl who is mangled or who is injured.
Signs, messages. Mediums describe recognizable details for families, traits, phrases, tiny gestures impossible to invent. For research, separating wish, memory, and verifiable data is key. That's why method matters, and humility too.
Science does not have an explanation yet. I mean, when we think about what does it mean to have an explanation, in science, what that typically means is we want a causal explanation. We want to know that this interacts with that and that interacts with this, and we have a causal sequence that explains how things work. So from that perspective, we have no idea. We don't know how psychic abilities work. But we also don't know how consciousness works. We don't have any explanations for that either. We're still very young creatures, and science is too new. So I think about other planets out there that may be 1 billion years ahead of us. They probably know a little bit more than we do, if there are people who are scientists there. And they would look back at us, what we're trying to do now, and saying, these creatures don't have any idea what's going on. I mean, most of the really fundamental questions that we would have about life and us and the planet and universe and all that stuff, which are all very interesting questions, we have some answers, but it's just barely begun. And all scientists learn very quickly that there are certain things you don't talk about. You don't push against the social environment in science, because if you do, you won't have a job. You won't be able to do what you want to do. So this is no different than in politics or in any other domain of human affairs. So we learn that there are certain things you talk about and certain things you don't.
Whether telepathy, clairvoyance, or the mind's mystery, theory should accommodate the phenomenon. If physics doesn't allow it, perhaps we need more physics.
So I always tell people have an open mind, but also whatever comes through, if it's true for you and it resonates, then hold on to that. That's your evidence. That's what you need, you know? You don't need someone to go down a long list of 100 different things for you to finally get it and believe. Because my job isn't to convince you that there's an afterlife or that I'm really psychic or that I can really pick up on things. My job is to just be the messenger and to let you know that they're with you, to let you know that there's things that they're bringing through that they're simply acknowledging, so you know that it's really them, because only they would know, because they're close to you, they're connected to you.
In global archives, thousands of accounts form a map of patterns. None proves the afterlife alone together. They open a question that won't close. The scientific question isn't, does the afterlife exist? But what happens to consciousness under extreme conditions?
Unless we know what consciousness is, or awareness, then we can't explain anything. So then it changes the question from how do I become aware of what I'm capable of at an unconscious level? And the traditional answer to that, which I think is probably the safest method, is through meditation. So meditation in many ways is all about getting in contact with your unconscious. You get to deeper and deeper levels of awareness about what's going on, and eventually you reach a level of awareness where we might say that somebody would become extremely psychic.
In resuscitation rooms, some studies have detected electrical markers during CPR that might correlate with experience. There are criticisms. Neurophysiology proposes hypoxia effects, neurotransmitters, or memory construction. The debate remains open. Meanwhile, researchers like Penny Sartori followed ICU patients for years, documenting NDEs in clinical context.
For me to share with you that I have perfect memory of every experience I had in the tunnel and in the light and in my conversation with God, and that I remember it as clearly as I'm talking to you now, is not able to be proven scientifically, because our understanding of the word memory is that it is in the brain, and the brain was in the body, and the body was in the car. So no, I cannot prove to you scientifically how I can have perfect memory of this experience.
Science and experience are not enemies. One asks for method, the other asks for listening. At the frontier, both can be learned.
Well, you know, mind reading, mentality, things and telepathics come here. Again, this comes right up through the center of my being. It's not necessarily something that I will hear. I mean, I will do this in the course of a reading to try to adjust my ability to perceive. This happens all the time in the course of readings. I'll say something and I'll notice when I say it, those aren't the normal words that I would use to convey this thought. And the person across from the table from me is going, oh my God, that is exactly what my dad would say. That is exactly what my mother would say. So they're not my words, they're words of spirit.
No matter who I've talked to, even when I've talked to people that are not open spiritually or have open minds, they still have a sense that their loved one is still with them. They can't explain it. You know, I talk to people all the time that says, I don't know how I know, I just know my mother's still with me. And I'm gonna know that forever. Or I know my father's still with me. This is something we've always been able to do, we just forgot. And then we're afraid, we block it out for religious reasons. We think that it's evil or negative, and so our conscious mind blocks it out. But then when we begin to remember the nature of who we are and connect to our heart again and meditate, and then we open up to these subtle energies and we're able to really realize that there's so much more to life than the physical world.
Studies consistently show after effects: less interest in status, more empathy, a change in values. Those who return often live differently, with purpose, with less fear, with a quiet urgency to love.
Just believe in yourself and what you see and what you know. And if you're doing something good and trying to be good and beneficial to the world, then the things people say they're not real. They don't matter. So that's what I usually say, Just believe in what you have as your own intuition.
So I've actually helped my father in his 90s and my mother in her 90s both understand, with my guarantee, where they are going with no fear, and it has helped them leave in peace.
I was lucky to be killed. Think about what I'm saying. I was lucky to be killed and then to come back so that I could say all of this and know all of this.
As my friend and spiritual teacher who passed away would say to me, every moment, every breath is a moment of creation. Some people get so caught in the process of, oh, I want this, and I want this, and I want this, and then it doesn't show up immediately, so then they're like, well, that's not going to happen. Well, every moment, every thought, every breath is a creation. Now you've got 5 minutes of moving toward it, and all of a sudden, oh, well, it's not going to happen. You just shut it down.
More than an ending, an NDE seems like a pedagogy of life.
None of us are alone, and if we really knew who stood beside us and behind us and in front of us, we'd never fear anything. We'd never be afraid to go after our dreams and live our best life and take that chance and take that risk. We wouldn't be afraid that we didn't have money to do the things that we wanted to do. We wouldn't be afraid to do anything. We'd be more fearless. And we would walk with blind faith, just knowing that everything was always going to work out and that we'd be okay.
From IANS to the Institute of Noetic Sciences, global conferences and archives gather cases, analyses, and debate. At UVA, Grayson and colleagues investigate NDEs and their impact. Media and lectures bring evidence to the public.
Younger scientists are grown up in a very different kind of context. And especially people paying attention to surprises and strange things about quantum mechanics and the physical world, I think is beginning to loosen up people's previous assumptions about what do we actually know about physicality. And that alone could be enough to eventually change how people feel about these topics as well.
My experience in the light enabled me to feel a deeper sense of spirituality, less defined by any one religion or another. So all religions, in my opinion and experience, have true spirituality at the core. And all religions, to different degrees and in different ways, are guilty of a form of righteousness that has the details of their description.
Bridges between science and spirit. Perhaps there's no need to choose. Perhaps consciousness is more. If these stories teach anything, it's that love seems prior to fear, and that life may be larger than the body.
There are only two ways: fear and love, nothing else. The rest doesn't exist. And fear is false. We use it, false evidence appearing real, F-E-A-R. False evidence appearing to be real. That's what fear is. It's not real. It's not real at all. Fears are based on nothing.
We don't know if death is a door or a mirror, but those who returned speak about life. Perhaps the question isn't what comes after, but what will you do with what you learned today? If, at that edge, we discover love, purpose, and companionship, perhaps living is learning to remember.